Hey friends, it's Peter. I'm back. I have 5 more tips for how you can improve your teaching of novels and plays in the high school English language arts classroom. My first tip is this. There are 5 dynamics at play to create meaning when we read a novel or a play in a high school English classroom. The first is plot, the second is character, the third is setting, the fourth is a kind of a wide collection of writerly devices and techniques, including things like tone, mood, irony, word choice, figurative language, etc. And the fifth is the knowledge and understandings that your students bring to the table when they engage with the text. On the second or third day of teaching a novel or a play, you will likely want to present your students with a lecture to help them understand what's going on in the novel or play, or remind them what's going on in the novel or play so that you can move forward. And when you teach this clarifying lecture, I think the impulse is often to lead with plot. And I don't think that plot is necessarily a mistake. Reminding your students of the sequence of events in the order that the sequence of events took place can be really helpful for reviewing what's happened in the novel or play and helping your students get a firm footing in understanding the work. However, I've had a lot more luck leading with character. To do this, I write all of the characters' names on the board and we just unpack what's going on in the life of each character and what the character's motivations are, what the character's problems are. And I find that when I do this, I have a more engaged, more lively conversation. I think this is because we humans are social creatures and my students would rather talk about people than events. And I find that when I lead with character, the plot just naturally fills in as we talk about the characters. And generally, my students move into the reading of the text for the day more interested and more excited. My second new tip for teaching novels and plays is to not forget about setting. And with regard to setting, I think it's too easy for students and sometimes teachers to think that setting is just the place, but it's really important to talk about setting being time and place. And talking about setting as time and place is so important because so many themes of works are time bound. That is, when we read The Great Gatsby, there are a lot of general messages about humanity that you can derive from reading the work, but there are a number of specific time bound and place bound messages that we can derive from reading the work. It's largely a work about America as it was in the 1920s. Likewise, when we read a work like Pride and Prejudice, it's chock full of timeless themes, but a lot of its messages are time and place bound and are specific to the lives of women in England in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Talking to your students about setting can be really fruitful when it facilitates conversations that let you compare and contrast the time and place that the work took place to our time and place now. And it can help the students think more deeply about the ways that we live our lives today. I think too often students move through life thinking that the status quo now is the way that things have always been. And when we do this compare contrast exercise between the settings of older works and the settings of our lives, students gain real insight into the way we're living today. My third tip is to model the way that you muddle through a work. And when I say muddle through, I mean imagine that you're working through the literature for the first time. You're not the class expert, but rather someone else who is experiencing the work for the first time and runs into places where they are confused or delighted. Students benefit from understanding that the work is kind of an enigma. It's a puzzle box that needs to be unraveled. And if you present yourself as someone who just gets it all the time, they're going to look at the work and not get it and wonder why they don't and think it's just natural to not get it, as if they are a person who just doesn't understand things and other people just magically understand. Likewise, I think we have to model our muddling through and confusion because we have to model our excitement and our enthusiasm. And sometimes students don't pick up subtleties like tone or humor in a work. And if we can show them places where the text delights us, they will learn to read and be more receptive to places where text might delight them. I think fondly back on a college class I had where we were reading Heart of Darkness, which is, as the title might suggest, a pretty dark work of literature. And the professor paused one day to talk about some of the passages she thought were especially beautiful, places where the weaving of the words and the density of the words kind of evoked the weaving and density of the jungle. And after she did that, I became a slower, more cautious, more conscientious reader of the text myself. My fourth tip runs a little bit counter to my third tip. In the third tip, we hold on tight and we show students how we do things. In the fourth tip, we let go. And this tip is you need to give your students room to breathe and you need to give them room to interact with the text on their own. You need to give them room to muddle through after you've modeled the ways that you muddle through. And to this end, I think you should maybe initially do guided discussions where you ask questions and lead your students through answering them by having them raise hands and then respond to one another. After you've done this for 1 or 2 periods, I think it's proper to move to a Socratic circle discussion at any grade level in high school, 9th, 10th, or 11th or 12th. I won't talk to you specifically about how to do a Socratic discussion. There are plenty of videos about that on YouTube already. Right now, I will just give you 3 quick tips that have helped me to be more satisfied with the Socratic discussions in my classroom. My first tip is that you always need to warn students that they're going to have a Socratic discussion. You cannot spring a sudden Socratic discussion on students one day. Often, a number of students might not have done the reading or might not have done it as carefully as they would have if they'd known there was going to be a Socratic discussion. And if you warn students there will be a Socratic discussion, you can also tell them that they need to answer a number of questions in anticipation of the discussion and write a number of their own questions in anticipation of the discussion. When my students have a Socratic discussion, they always go home with homework questions the night before. And when they show up for class, I give them 5 or 8 minutes to get their ducks in a row and review their notes before we spring into our Socratic discussions. My second tip is that the first 1 or 2 Socratic discussions will always go poorly, and you just have to accept it. After the first 1 or 2 go poorly, the students start to learn how to do it. The third and fourth and fifth will go well. And I would caution you then against over relying on Socratic discussions when they start to go really well, because there's nothing worse than burning out on Socratic discussions because you've done too many of them, and then coming to class second semester with a really great work of literature that you'd like your students to discuss Socratically and have them complain that they've done too many Socratic discussions already and are burned out. Sometimes, if you do 3 or 4 or 5 Socratic discussions in a row, students can have the impression that you're phoning it in and leaving the work to them to break down and understand the text, and they can build resentment towards you for that. My third tip is that I like to give students a collective grade for the Socratic discussion. A Socratic discussion, by its nature, ought to be a discussion, an exchange of ideas. It shouldn't be 1 or 2 or 3 of your best students showboating and breaking down all of the text on their own, pointing out everything that they noticed or everything that they read on SparkNotes or Schmoop to show that they're smarter than everyone else. I tell my students that my best students have an obligation not only to demonstrate their understandings, but also to bring other students into the conversation. To that end, in a discussion that is well-rounded, where a number of students exchange ideas, where students don't just move on after the smartest kid in the class says something on one point, but rather they unpack and exchange other ideas. When they have a really good Socratic discussion, I might give them 20 out of 20 points, whereas if the Socratic discussion is a lesser Socratic discussion, it's merely good, I might give 15 out of 15. And if they do an adequate but middling kind of job, I might give everyone 10 out of 10. And this is a strategy that motivates students to work together as a team because they understand that no matter what happens, everyone will get 100% for the assignment. But 20 out of 20 will hit the grade book harder than a 10 out of 10. And if some of them are sitting on those fine lines between an A and a B, or a B and a C, or a C and a D, then that 20 out of 20 is more likely to push them over than the 10 out of 10 is. My fifth tip is to recommend that you close your work on a novel or a play by having your students write a paper to demonstrate their understanding instead of giving them a multiple choice test or assessment. I think there's so few opportunities for students to write papers and grow as writers in high school, and so many opportunities for them to take multiple choice tests and grow as multiple choice test takers that it would be a real shame to pass up a chance to write a good paper. To that end, I have 6 different recommendations for kinds of papers you can write with your students at the conclusion of a novel or a play. My first recommendation is to have the students write a theme paper. I think that the theme paper is the ultimate English class assignment where the students write about what a work means and how it achieves its meaning. That being said, I am concerned in the modern age that there are way too many theme papers already available on the internet, and there are way too many help sites like SparkNotes and Shmoop available for students to read and learn about themes and then paraphrase and regurgitate what they've read without actually doing the wrestling with the text and the thinking required of genuinely discerning what the theme is and genuinely figuring out how to argue how it's developed. Therefore, when I do theme papers, I try and do them over newer works, short stories, poems, newer plays and novels that maybe don't have as much material already posted online about them. My second paper recommendation is the part and whole essay. In this particular essay, I have students write about how one part of the work is relevant to the whole and the development of its meaning. I frequently frame this by saying that we're thinking about publishing a new version of the text, but because modern attention spans have shortened, we would like to shorten the work in question. And therefore, I will give them a list of characters or chapters that we're thinking about cutting, and they would then write a paper that argues that this character or this chapter is necessary for the development of the book for reasons X, Y, and Z, and then X, Y, and Z become their body paragraphs, and they write arguments for why that character or chapter should stay in the book. My third recommendation for a paper is a relevance paper in which students write about why a novel or a play is still relevant to read today. This can go along with my second tip from earlier on the importance of setting, and students can do some compare and contrast between the time and the place that the work was written in and the time and the place that we live now. My fourth recommendation is a synthesis essay in which the students write about the work that you read in class in conjunction with some other work that you give to them, such as an essay, such as a poem, such as a photograph, such as a short story. And it might be not that you give them the other text, but they go out and find the other text. And then they have to write about these things in conjunction with one another, in dialogue with one another, and how they compare and contrast. My fifth recommendation is one of my favorites. It can be a good paper. It also lends itself to a good video, like a YouTube book talk that they might post. And that is that the students pick 2 or 3 parts of the book that are their favorite, that were relevant to them personally, and they talk about those parts. When I give this assignment, students have to not only talk about the work, but they have to interrogate their own lives. They have to think about why these parts were so important to them, and they have to share anecdotes and life experiences and their values that made these things matter to them. My last recommendation is that students do creative papers. This could be fan fiction where they write new scenes with the characters from the work. It could be scenes that the work mentioned that weren't included in the work, but rather gone over in exposition quickly, and we could include those scenes and show what they looked like. This could be bringing in guest stars from other works to take part in the work that we recently read and writing about what that scene might look like. It could be students writing their own poetry inspired by the work, and sometimes when they write their own poetry, I like to have them do it in the voice or the style of another poet. Say if we've recently read Langston Hughes or Emily Dickinson. Those are my 5 additional tips for teaching a novel or a play in class. If you're a new teacher who has questions you'd like me to answer, I'd love to see them in the comments below. If you're a veteran teacher who has your own advice, I would love to see those in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. You may push the buttons below if you'd like. Happy teaching.